She hadn't thing left. No code. No to be fair, money, and no name anyone wanted to claim. Just a swollen belly, a bruised wrist, and a dirt road going nowhere in. The middle of pretty much a South Dakota winter that didn't care if she lived or died. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the last person she'd asked for help had looked at her stomach, looked at her face, and driven away without a word. She was 17 years old. The man who found her wasn't looking for anyone to save. He was 61, lived alone in a house that still smelled like his dead wife's soap. Hadn't spoken more than 20 words to another human being in the past month. He was Lakota. He was quiet. He was carrying his own grief like a stone he'd forgotten was even heavy anymore. He almost drove past her. He almost didn't stop, but he did. And what happened next? Over the following weeks, through a brutal winter, through secrets that slowly came apart like wet paper, would change both of them in ways neither one expected. Not in the way people say when they mean something small, in the way that rearranges who you are at the center. This is a true story, not the kind that's been cleaned up to make people feel good. The kind that's messy and cold and real, with moments of grace so unexpected they almost don't seem possible, except they happened. Her name was Carla. His name was Joseph Swiftwind. And neither one of them knew, on that frozen road, that the other one was exactly what they had been waiting for without knowing they were waiting. This is where it begins. The temperature that morning was 7 degrees below zero and dropping. Joseph Swiftwind had lived on the Pine Ridge Reservation his entire life, 61 years of South Dakota winters, and he still felt it in his knees the way he felt nothing else. A deep, grinding to be fair, cold that moved through bone the way water moves through cracked stone, slow, patient, inevitable. He pulled on his second pair of wool socks, his flannel-lined work pants, his heaviest coat, and he went outside to start his truck the way he did every morning, 20 minutes before he needed to leave, because the engine needed time, and so did he. The truck was a 1998 Ford F-150 dark green with a dent in the passenger door from a fence post incident he didn't like to talk about, and a crack in the windshield that had been there so long he'd stopped seeing it. He let it idle, breath steaming in the cab, and he looked out at the land the way he always did in the morning. Not admiring it exactly, more like acknowledging it. The way you acknowledge something that was there before you and will be there after. He was going to town for hardware supplies. A water pipe under his kitchen floor had been making a sound for 3 days that he didn't like, and Joseph was the kind of man who didn't wait for problems to become emergencies. He had learned that lesson in the hard way, in a different context, years ago, and it had stayed with him. The road from his property into town was 11 miles of two-lane highway that crossed through flat land and then dipped slightly through a stretch of scrubby cottonwood trees near the old irrigation ditch. Most mornings he didn't see another vehicle for the first 4 or 5 miles. This morning was the same. Gray sky, gray road, the heater working on making the cab something close to warm. He saw her at the 3-mile mark, and she was on the right side of the road, walking in the same direction he was driving, which meant he saw her back first. A dark-look, green jacket that wasn't built for this weather. The thin kind, canvas, no insulation, the kind people wore in October before they understood what was coming. She was moving slowly, and not the slow of someone taking a morning walk. The slow of someone who had been walking a very long time and wasn't sure how much longer they could. Joseph drove past her. Plus, he went about 200 yards down the road, and then he stopped the truck. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, and he looked in the rearview mirror at the small figure getting smaller in the distance, and he thought about all the reasons not to go back. He wasn't a man who collected other people's problems. He had enough of his own, which he was 61 years old and lived alone and liked it that way, or had convinced himself he did, which was close enough. The world was full of situations that were not his business. He turned the truck around. When he pulled up beside her and lowered the passenger window, he got his first look at her face. She was young, much younger than he'd expected. 17, though he wouldn't know that for another hour. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had mostly come loose, and her face was the face of someone who had used up every resource they had and was now operating on something beyond resource, something more like stubbornness or desperation or both. Her lips were chapped white at the corners. There were dark circles under her eyes, so deep they looked bruised. And she was pregnant, very pregnant, plus 7 months, as it would turn out, though at that moment Joseph estimated 8, because she was small-framed and the belly looked enormous on her. She didn't say anything when he pulled up. She just looked at him with an expression that wasn't quite fear and not quite hope, but somewhere between them, the way a person looks when they've been disappointed enough times that they don't allow themselves to expect anything until they've proof. "Where are you going?" Joseph asked, and she said, "Wherever is warm." He thought about that for a second. Then he said, "Get in." She hesitated, which he understood the hesitation. A girl alone on an empty road, a strange man in a truck. The math of that was obvious, and she'd already lived enough of life to know it. He didn't try to argue with the hesitation or talk her out of it. He just waited. She got in. The heat from events hit her immediately, and something happened in her face that she clearly didn't intend. Her eyes filled up, not crying exactly, just the physical response of a body that had been cold for too long suddenly, encountering warmth. She pressed her lips together and looked straight ahead and didn't say anything. Joseph drove. He didn't pepper her with questions. Actually, that wasn't his way. He turned the heat up a little higher and he drove, and after a few minutes he reached behind the seat without looking. Found like the granola bar he kept back there out of habit, left over from years of long drives, and he sat on the console between them without saying anything. TBH, she looked at it. Then she picked it up and ate it in about 45 seconds. He drove another mile before he said, "There's a diner in town. They open at 7. She said, "I don't have any money." "I know," he said. She looked at him for the first time since getting in. Try to read him. He kept his eyes on the road. Her name was Carla Whitehorse, which she told him that at the diner over eggs and toast and the large orange juice he ordered for her without asking because she looked like someone who needed vitamin C and calories and anything else that could be found in a glass. She was from Rapid City originally, though she hadn't been back there in almost a year. Her mother had died when Carla was 14. Cancer, fast and brutal, gone in 4 months. After that, she, to be fair, had lived with her older brother, Marcus, who was 26, and worked at a car parts warehouse, and had for 2 years been mostly decent to her in the way that a person can be mostly decent without being particularly kind. Joseph listened. Pretty much, he didn't react much. He had a stillness to him that Carla would later describe as the most calming thing about him. In, those early days, not cold, not distant, but genuinely still the way deep water is still. It didn't make her feel judged. It pretty much made her feel like whatever she said would just be received, held, not thrown back at her. She told him about the baby's father, whose name was Derek, who was 23 and had seemed like stability when she met him at 18. She turned 17 the previous spring, but told him she was 18, and he believed her or pretended to. Derek had worked at a restaurant, had his own apartment, had been gentle with her for the first 3 months, and then not gentle at all after that, in ways she didn't detail and Joseph didn't ask about, only nodded slightly to show he understood the shape of what she wasn't saying. When she told Derek she was pregnant, he left. Not dramatically. He didn't yell or make a scene. He just started responding to her texts less, and then not at all, and when she went to his apartment one evening, someone else answered the door. TBH, a woman, older, who looked at Carla's belly and then looked at Carla's face and said, "He doesn't live here anymore," and closed the door. So she'd gone back to her brother. Marcus had let her stay for 2 months. He hadn't basically been warm about it, but he'd let her stay, which she told herself was something. She'd slept on his couch and tried to stay out of his way and eaten carefully so as not to use too much of his food, the particular kind of invisible that people learn to be when they're guests in a place that doesn't really want them. Then, 3 weeks TBH ago, Marcus had told her she needed to leave. He hadn't honestly been brutal about it. He'd been matter of fact. He'd said he couldn't support her and a baby, that he had his own life, that she needed to figure something out. He'd given her $40 and driven her to the bus station. She hadn't known where to go, and she bought a bus ticket going vaguely toward nowhere specific, just out, just away, and had ended up in a town she didn't know with $30 and then 20 and then nothing, and she'd been sleeping in the waiting area of a laundromat for 4 nights until the owner asked her to leave, and then she just started walking. She'd been walking for 6 hours when Joseph found her. He sat across from her at the diner table and listened to all of this with that same stillness. And when she was done, he looked at his coffee cup for a moment, and then he said, "Do you have somewhere to go after this?" She said no. He nodded, looked at the coffee again. "My house has a spare room," he said. It's not much, but it's warm and it's clean, and it's a door that locks from inside." She stared at him. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, in the tone of a man stating a fact, not making a promise. "I'm just telling you the room is there." Later, she would try to explain to people why she said yes, why she trusted him. Plus, she'd say she couldn't fully explain it except to say that something in the way he spoke, the flatness of it, the lack of performance, made her believe him in a way she couldn't believe people who were more obviously trying to be believed. She said yes. His house was modest in the way that things are modest when they've been lived in practically and without vanity for a long time. A wood frame house, single story, with a covered porch, and a wood stove in the living room that radiated a heat so solid it felt like something you could lean against. The walls had things on them, not decorations exactly, more like objects that had accumulated meaning over time. A sort of photograph of two people on a porch that Carla recognized as younger versions of Joseph, and a woman she didn't know. A hand-stitched piece of fabric in a frame that she would later learn was made by Joseph's grandmother. A child's drawing, laminated, of a house and a sun and two stick figures. The spare room had a single bed with a quilt on it, and a wooden dresser with 3 of the 4 knobs intact, and a window that looked out over the back of the property toward a line of bare cottonwood trees. It was by any objective measure a completely ordinary small room in a completely ordinary small house. To Carla, who had been sleeping in a laundromat, it looked like something out of a dream. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her hands on her knees, and for the first time in weeks she cried. Not the quiet eye filling at the diner. Actually cried, the kind that involves your whole body and makes sounds you can't control. She pressed her face into the quilt to muffle it, embarrassed, though there was no one there to hear. Joseph had gone to the kitchen to make soup. He heard her through the thin walls, and he turned the radio on low, an old country station, not to cover the sound, but to give her something to cry alongside that wasn't silence. He didn't knock on the door. He didn't check on her. He let her cry for as long as she needed. That was, though neither of them knew it yet, the first thing he did that she would remember for the rest of her life. Over the next few days, a careful, quiet routine established itself. Joseph woke early, made coffee, worked on the pipe problem, and other small repairs the house required. Carla slept later, which he expected given her condition and what she'd been through, and when she came out she would find coffee already made, and usually something simple on the stove or left in a covered pan, oatmeal or eggs or the fried bread he made on the second morning that she ate 3 pieces of without speaking. They didn't talk much at first, not because it was uncomfortable exactly, but because neither of them were people who filled silence with noise. They, I guess, existed in the same space in a way that was careful and respectful, like 2 people in a library who have acknowledged each other without needing to make conversation. On the 3rd day, she asked if she could help with anything. He thought about it. "Plus, can you cook?" he asked. "A little. You can help with dinner," he said. "If pretty much you want." She didn't want. She peeled potatoes, actually, while he seasoned the venison, and they worked in the kitchen with the radio on, and the wood stove making its low sounds, and the wind picking up outside. It was the most comfortable she had felt in close to a year. She asked him about the photograph on the wall. The woman. "My wife," he said. "Ruth, which she passed 4 years ago." "I'm sorry," Carla said. "So basically he said, and went back to the venison." She didn't push. She filed it away. At night, she lay in the spare room and listened to the sounds of the house. The wood stove settling, the wind, the occasional creak of Joseph moving from his room to the bathroom and back. Ordinary sounds. Plus, the sounds of a house that was inhabited. She hadn't understood, until those nights, how much she had missed the sound of another person existing nearby. Not actually talking, not doing anything particular, just being there. The particular comfort of knowing that if something happened, someone would hear. On the 5th night, she woke up at 2 in the morning with a particular sharp ache in her lower back that had been visiting her for weeks, worse now, and she lay there in the dark pressing her hand against her belly and talking to the baby the way she had taken to doing when no one could hear. She said, "I don't know what I'm doing, but I think we're okay right now. I think this is okay." The baby moved. She, to be fair, pressed harder, feeling the small, solid-shaped shift under her palm, and something settled in her chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. What she didn't know, lying in that room in the dark, was that 3 rooms away Joseph Swiftwind was also awake, sitting in the chair by his window the way he sat most nights, looking out at the reservation land under the winter sky, and thinking about his wife and his daughter who lived in Minnesota and called on Sundays, and the child drawing on the wall that was his granddaughter's, and the strange weight of a life that had become very quiet. He was thinking, too, about the girl in the spare room, about the particular courage it took to get into a stranger's truck when you hadn't a thing left, about the way, for what it's worth, she'd eaten that granola bar. Not frantically, but with a focused deliberateness that told him she'd learned to eat like someone who didn't know when the next meal was coming. He was 61 years old and had spent 4 years learning to be alone, and he wasn't sure yet what to make of the fact that the house felt different with her in it. Not uncomfortable. The opposite. Like something that had been slightly off balance had found its level. He didn't examine that thought too closely. He went to bed. But the thought stayed. In town, Joseph wasn't a man who invited conversation about his personal life, and people who knew him respected that. But he was also not able to go to the hardware store and the grocery store over the following week without people noticing that he was buying different things than usual. More food, and the kind of food that wasn't just one person's food, prenatal vitamins, which the pharmacist at the small drugstore noticed and chose not to comment on. His neighbor, a TBH, woman named Delia Crow Dog, who was 73 and had known Joseph since he was a child, called him on the 8th day. "I hear you've someone staying with you," she said. "Word travels," he said. "It actually always has," she said. "Is she all right?" "She's getting there," he said. Delia was quiet for a moment. "You're a good man, Joseph." "I just have an empty room," he said. "Sure," said Delia, "and you just have an empty room." He hung up and went back to fixing the pipe. What he TBH didn't tell Delia, what he hadn't fully told himself, was that the house being less quiet had done something to him that he hadn't expected and wasn't entirely sure how to account for. He had, over 4 years, made a kind of peace with the silence. Not happiness. He was clear-eyed enough to know it wasn't that, but a workable arrangement with being alone. He'd thought of it as practical, which he was too old to need things. He sort of had enough, which Carla had been in his house for 8 days, and he was already aware that when she laughed at something on the radio, which had happened twice, both times at some absurdity in the afternoon call-in show she'd started listening to while he worked outside. The sound of it did something he didn't have the right word for. Not quite joy, more like recognition. Like something recognizing something. He didn't examine that thought too closely either. He went back to the pipe, which on the 9th day, Carla asked him about the child's drawing. They were sitting after dinner, Carla with her decaf tea that she'd started making each evening, Joseph with the last of his coffee. The drawing had been on the wall for so long that he sometimes went weeks without seeing it, the way you stop seeing things that have always been there. "My granddaughter," he said, "Lily, which she's 6 now, made that when she was 4. She drew your house," Carla said, "and 2 basically people. Me and her," he said. "She told me that's who they were." Carla looked at it for a moment. "Does she visit?" "Summer, mostly. Her mother, my daughter Sarah, she's in Minneapolis. Good job there. She comes when she can. You must miss them." He looked at the drawing. "Every day," he said. It was the most personal thing he'd said to her. She understood the weight of it and didn't try to add to it or reduce it. She just nodded. They sat with it in the comfortable way they had found in those 9 days of sitting with things. Outside, the wind pushed against the house, which the wood stove made its sounds. The radio played something low and old. Neither of them spoke for a while. And in the silence was the beginning of something that neither of them had a word for yet, but that both of them, in their separate private ways, were beginning to recognize. The room was warm. The night was long. And somewhere behind Carla's ribs, the baby turned over and settled, as if it too was getting comfortable in this place it hadn't expected to land. By the 2nd week, the house had adjusted to 2 people in it the way a sleeping body adjusts to a new position. Not all at once, but in small shifts, each one making the next one easier. Joseph hadn't actually planned for any of it. He wasn't the kind of man who planned for people. He planned for winter weather, for equipment that would eventually fail, for the reliable unpredictability of a land. People were harder to plan for. People arrived with their own architecture, their own schedules and habits and invisible requirements, and you either made room for that architecture or you didn't. Joseph, it turned like out, made room more naturally than he would have predicted. Carla woke at 7:30, which was later than him, but earlier than he'd expected. She moved carefully, I guess, in the mornings the way heavily pregnant women move, with a deliberateness. That wasn't slowness, but precision. Her body had become something that required management, and she managed it with a quiet competence that he noticed. She didn't complain about the physical discomfort, and he knew there was plenty of it. He'd been through a pregnancy with Ruth 35 years ago, and he remembered enough to know that at 7 months, every ordinary movement had a cost attached. She wasn't someone who asked for help without needing it, but he discovered, someone who accepted help when it was offered without making a performance of accepting it, which he found he appreciated more than he would have expected. He started leaving, I guess, a glass of water and a small dish of crackers on the kitchen table before he went out in the mornings because she'd mentioned once, without looking for sympathy, that the nausea was still bad in the first minutes of being upright. He didn't say anything about leaving them. They were just there. She didn't say anything about finding them. Plus, she just ate them. This became the first of several small understandings. On the 12th day, she asked him about the land. They were on the porch in the afternoon, which had warmed to 15 degrees, practically balmy by recent standards. Carla had wrapped herself in the heavy blanket she'd taken to carrying around the house like a second skin. She was looking out at the flat expanse of the reservation, the dried grass, bent under the wind, the far line of hills, going blue in the afternoon light. "How much of it is yours?" she asked. "The house and about 40 acres around it," he said. "Past that fence line is tribal land." "Have you always lived here?" "Except for 7 years," he said. "I went to work in Rapid City after I got out of the army. Came back when my father got sick." He paused. "Never left again after that." "You were in the army?" 3 years. Long time ago." She looked at his hands, which were resting on the porch railing, large, work-worn, with a scar along the right thumb she'd noticed before but not asked about. "What did you do after?" "Before Rapid City. Worked construction for a while. Then, I learned to do metalwork. Welding, fabrication. I was good at it." He said this without pride, the way you state a factual qualification. "Ran my own small shop for a few years here after I came back." "What happened to it?" "Ruth got sick," he said. "I needed to be home." He looked out at the land. The shop closed. It was honestly the right thing. Carla was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you ever regret it?" He thought about that seriously, which she had already learned was his way. He didn't give quick answers to real questions. "No," he said finally. "I regret she got sick. I don't regret what I did about it." She nodded slowly, filed that away too, the way she had been filing things about him since the first day, building a picture, piece by careful piece, of who this person was who had stopped on a frozen road for no reason, except that he wasn't the kind of person who could drive past. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask. Why did you stop for me?" That morning, he was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I almost didn't, but you did." "My wife would have," he said. She would kind of have stopped without even slowing down first. She was like that. He paused. "I figured if I drove past, she would have been disappointed in me." Even now, Carla looked at him. He was still looking at the land. "Plus, she sounds, I guess, like she was a good person," Carla said. "The best I ever knew," he said simply, and then he went back inside to start dinner. Carla stood on the porch a little longer, the blanket pulled around her shoulders, looking at the hills going darker in the fading light. She thought about her own mother, about the particular way her mother used to brush her hair when she was small, with a slow patience that Carla had taken completely for granted and had been trying to reconstruct in memory ever since she lost her. She thought about how you don't know, when you're 7 or 8 years old, someone is brushing your hair, that you're building the memory you'll reach for in every hard moment for the rest of your life. She put her sort of hand on her belly. "Your grandmother would have stopped too," she said, low enough that no one could hear. The baby moved. Inside, Joseph made fry bread and bean soup, and Carla set the table without being asked, and they ate together in the comfortable half-silence that had become their evening habit, and it occurred to Joseph at some point during the meal that he hadn't thought about eating alone in several days, which wasn't able because eating alone had been the part of solitude he minded most, and He'd stopped minding it, and he wasn't entirely sure what to make of that. On the 14th day, his daughter Sarah called. He answered in basically the kitchen while Carla was in her room reading. He didn't try to explain the situation in any particular way. He wasn't a man who managed conversations toward outcomes. He said, "I've someone staying with me. A young woman, I think, I found on the road. She was in trouble." There was a pause. Sarah knew her father well enough to know that found on the road and in trouble from him meant something specific and real. "What kind of trouble?" she asked. "The kind that happens when people who should look after someone don't," he said. Like another pause. "Is she okay?" "Getting there, Dad," Sarah said. "How pregnant is she?" He was briefly surprised, then wasn't. Sarah had always been perceptive. 7.5 months now. "Joseph Swiftwind," said Sarah, and the use of his full name wasn't angry, but something between fond and exasperated. "You took in a stranger who's about to have a baby." "I've a spare room," he said. Yeah, I guess, could hear her exhaling. The particular exhale of someone trying to decide how to respond to something they probably should have expected, but still didn't. "She's not dangerous," he added. "I know she's not dangerous, Dad. I'm worried about you getting—" She stopped. "Getting what?" "Attached," she said. "You get attached. Plus, you always have." Joseph looked at the pot on the stove. "She needs help." "I'm helping." "Okay," Sarah said, and she sounded like she had more to say, but was choosing not to say it. "Is there, to be fair, anything she needs which that I can send?" This surprised him more than the perceptiveness had. "You don't need to. What does she need, Dad?" He thought about it honestly. "She doesn't have much. Clothes that fit. She's growing." "I'll send a box," Sarah said. "I still have some things." "Sarah, I'm sending a box," she said, in a voice that meant it was already decided. "Take care of yourself, too. Plus, not just her." After he hung up, he stood in the kitchen for a moment thinking about what his daughter had said. The word, to be fair, attached. He turned it over. He wasn't sure attached was the word. Plus, responsible, maybe. Like, he felt responsible. The, I guess, way you feel responsible for anything that depends on you. A fence, a garden, an old engine that needs regular attention. It wasn't complicated. Plus, it didn't need to be more than what it was. He went back to the pot. 3 days later, a box arrived from Minneapolis. It had been packed with the efficiency of someone who had done it on purpose and without waste. 3 maternity shirts, 2 pairs of leggings with the stretch panels, a thick wool sweater in dark red, a pair of slip-on boots in what turned out to be exactly Carla's size, prenatal vitamins, a paperback novel, and a handwritten note that said, "My name is Sarah. My dad is one of the good ones. I hope you're warm." Carla sat on her bed with the box open and read the note twice, and then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of the nightstand. She put on, I think, the red sweater. It fit perfectly. She went out to the kitchen where Joseph was reading the newspaper, an actual paper newspaper, delivered weekly, which she had come to find quietly charming, and she said, "Your daughter sent a box." He looked up, registered the sweater, and "I see that. She didn't have to do that." "No," he agreed. "She sounds good," Carla said, from a note. He said. "She's very good." And the way he said it, not proud exactly, more like grateful, like she was a fact of the world he was glad to know, made something in Carla's chest do a complicated thing that she didn't examine too closely. She said, "Thank you for calling her, for telling her." "I didn't ask her to send anything," he said, honestly. "I know," said Carla. "Plus, that's why it matters." He went back to his paper. She put the kettle on. Outside, the wind moved across the flat land, and the cottonwoods bent in it, and the sky was the white gray of a South Dakota February that still had a lot of winter left in it. There was kind of a morning about a week after that when Joseph came in from feeding the horses. He kept to a habit from earlier years that he maintained because he found their company steadying, and found Carla in the kitchen doing something he hadn't expected. She had taken out the cast iron skillet that lived on the back burner, the heavy one that Ruth had seasoned over 20 years until it was black as midnight and slick as glass, and she was making pancakes. Not, out of a box. She had found flour and baking soda and eggs and was doing it from what was evidently memory, working carefully, the belly making the reach to the back of the stove slightly awkward. He, stood in the kitchen doorway in his coat and boots and watched her for a moment without saying anything. She turned and saw him and said, "I found your flour. I hope that's okay. I wanted to do something." "It's okay," he said. My Mom used to make them on Saturdays, she said, turning back to the stove. In my opinion, from scratch. She said the box. Kind weren't real pancakes. She was quiet for a moment. Ivan T. made them since she died. I wasn't sure I remembered how. Do you? He asked. She flipped one. It was perfect, even golden, slightly crisp at the edges. She looked at it for a moment, and yeah, she said, and something in her voice was both steady and not. Eat dough. He took his coat off and washed his hands and sat down at the table, and she brought him a plate of pancakes and sat across from him with her own, and they ate together in the morning light with the radio on low, playing something old and quiet, and neither of them said anything about the fact that this felt like something. It felt like something. He had basically been thinking in the nights about Marcus. Carla hadn't brought her brother up again after that first morning at the diner, but Joseph had been carrying what she'd told him, quietly, without drama, the way he carried most things, and turning it over. A 17-year-old girl, pregnant, with nothing in the middle of winter, put on a bus with $40. He wasn't a man who felt anger readily. He'd learned, over 61 years, that most anger was just grief with nowhere to go, and he'd found better places for his grief. But this was something different from anger. It was a specific kind of cold clarity, the kind you get when you look at a situation plainly and see it for exactly what it is. A girl who needed her family. A brother who was that girl's only family. And a door that got closed. He actually didn't say any of this to Carla. It wasn't his place to put words to it, and she hadn't asked him to. But he thought about it. In the nights when the wind pushed hard against the house, and the wood stove made its keeping the cold out sounds, he thought about what it meant to be the only one, and to choose not to be. He thought, too, about his own choices. The years after Ruth, when Sarah had invited him to Minneapolis, and he had declined, time after time, until it became a comfortable pattern of declining that he told himself was about not being a burden. He thought about the phone calls that had gotten shorter over the years, not because either of them wanted that, but because it had just happened the way things happen when you stop actively choosing against them. He thought about Lily, who was 6, and who had drawn a picture of her grandfather's house with 2 stick figures and given it to him with the gravity of a person presenting a very important document. He thought about, I guess, rooms that sat empty. One evening near the end of February, Carla came out of her room with something in her hand. She sat down across from him at the kitchen table. He was going over some papers, property stuff, the kind of administrative ongoing of a life lived on land, and she put a small photograph on the table between them. He looked at it, a girl, maybe 8 or 9, gap-toothed, grinning on a porch somewhere. A woman beside her with the same dark hair and a hand around the girl's shoulder. Me and my look, Mom, Carla said. It's the only one I kept. I had it in my jacket pocket. He looked at it. The woman in the photo was laughing at something outside the frame, her head half turned. She had a lightness to her, the kind of TBH face that was used to laughing. She looks, I guess, like fun, Joseph said, and Carla said, she was the funniest person. She paused. People don't say that about moms. They say kind, or good, or patient. She was all those things, but mostly she was just really, really funny. She could make you laugh when you had no business laughing. Joseph looked at the photo again. What was her name? Diane, Carla said. Diane Whitehorse. He nodded. She'd be proud of you, he said, for how you're handling this. Carla looked at the photograph. I don't know, she said. I made a lot of bad decisions. You made some, he said, and then you kept going. Those are the basically same thing. She was quiet. Then, how do you know which ones you'll regret? He thought about it, the way he thought about real questions. You don't always, he said. Plus, but I think the ones that hurt the most to look back on aren't the mistakes. They're the moments when you could have been brave and weren't. He paused. The mistakes you can usually make peace with. The small cowardices take longer. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. That's a lot of wisdom for a Wednesday night, she said. It surprised like a sound out of him, not quite a laugh, but close. The first one she had heard from him, and it was small, rusty, and genuine, and she smiled at the way you smile at something unexpected that turns out to be exactly right. She picked up the photograph and went back to her room. He sat at the kitchen table for a moment, looking at the space where the photograph had been, thinking about Diane Whitehorse, who was funny, who was gone, who had a daughter walking around in the world carrying her memory in a jacket pocket. He thought about Ruth's soap smell that still lived in the bedroom, sometimes if the heating came on a certain way. He thought about how loss worked. In my opinion, how it didn't reduce. It just became something you carried differently, year by year, until eventually it became part of the shape of you, and you stopped being able to separate where the loss ended and where you began. He thought TBH about the girl in the next room, who was carrying something new and unknown and frightening, and who had in the 3 weeks since he'd picked her up on that frozen road, not once asked him for more than she needed, and who made pancakes from scratch on Saturday mornings, and left the kitchen cleaner than she found it. He turned off the kitchen light, and he stood in the dark for a moment. The house was warm. 2 people were sleeping in it. He went to bed. What he didn't know, and wouldn't know for a few more days, was that in 3 weeks, Carla was going to go into labor 6 weeks early at 2 in the morning in a snowstorm that had closed the main road. And everything he thought he knew about what he was capable of was going to be tested. But that was 3 weeks away, which for now the house was warm. The wood stove kept its steady sound. The wind moved, I guess, across the land the way it had moved across. That land for thousands of years over grass and snow and the bones of people who had known how to live in it. And somewhere in the spare bedroom, Carla Whitehorse lay with her hand pressed to her belly and said low and quiet, "I think we found somewhere, little one. I think this is real." It started at 2:14 in the morning. Joseph knew the time because he was already awake. He woke most nights between 1 and 3, an old pattern that had never broken. And he was sitting in the chair by his window with a glass of water, watching the snow come down. It had been coming down since 10 o'clock, and it hadn't slowed. The kind of snow that falls without hurry, without drama, as if it's all the time in the world and knows what it's doing. 6 inches already. To be fair, more coming. Plus, he heard Carla's door. In 3 weeks, he had learned the sounds of the house with 2 people in it. The particular creak of her door versus his, the way her footsteps were lighter than his but more frequent, the specific rhythm of her moving to the bathroom at night, which happened once, sometimes twice, and back. He knew by sound whether she'd gotten up for water or for something that was taking longer. This was different. He heard her stop in the hallway. A pause. Then, what to be fair, sound she was clearly trying not to make. A sharp inhalation pulled back before it could become something else. The sound of a person absorbing pain alone in the dark. He was, for what it's worth, already on his feet. He knocked once on her door and opened it without waiting. She was standing in the middle of the room with both hands on her. Lower back, her face set in an expression of concentrated control that told him everything. She was wearing the thick wool socks and the large t-shirt she slept in, and her hair was down, and she looked both very young and suddenly, utterly serious. "How far apart?" he asked, and she blinked at him. "What?" "For what it's worth, the contractions, which how far apart?" She stopped as another one started, and he watched her breathe through it, the specific breathing of someone who had read something about this or been told about it by someone, the in through the nose, the slow measured out, her hands pressing harder against her back. It lasted honestly, maybe 45 seconds, and then released her, and she straightened and said, "How do you know about contractions?" "My wife had a baby," he said. "How far apart?" "This is only the second one." "About," she looked at the clock on the nightstand. "About 12 minutes. 12 minutes. He looked at the window, at the snow coming down with that patient, purposeful quiet. He went to the window and looked out at the road, which was white and smooth and trackless. No one had been on it since the snow started. He went to the kitchen and called the number of the hospital in town, the number he had put in his phone the previous week, quietly, without mentioning it to Carla. He'd put it there the same way he'd put the crackers on the table in the morning, because the thing might happen, and it was better to have a number than to need one and not have it. The nurse on the phone was calm and thorough. "How many weeks?" she asked. 34, he said. Carla had told him that. The nurse's voice didn't change, but something in it became slightly more focused, the way a person leans forward without moving. "Early," she said. "How far apart?" 12 minutes, just started. "What is the road condition?" He looked out the window again and told her honestly. She told, I think, him to time the contractions and called back when they were 7 minutes apart or if anything changed. She told him what to watch for. She told him, sort of, that 34 weeks was early, but manageable, that the baby's lungs were likely developed enough, but that they needed to get to the hospital. She told him to stay calm. He thanked her and hung up and went back to Carla. She had sat down on the edge of the bed, same position as that first day, hands on her knees, back straight, a person trying to hold themselves together by posture alone. She looked up when he came in, and he could see, under the control, something close to terror. Not a performance of terror, and the real thing, quiet and contained, the kind that comes when you understand clearly what is happening and understand also that you can't stop it. What did they say? She asked. He told her honestly. 34 weeks was early, but likely okay. They needed to get to the hospital. He needed to time the contractions. The road, she said. I'll get, I guess, us there, he said. She looked at him. Joseph, I've driven that road and worse, he said, which was true. Get dressed. In my opinion, warm layers. I'm pretty much going to warn the truck. She didn't argue. He'd noticed early honestly that she didn't argue with practical instructions delivered without drama. It was one of the things that told him she'd spent her childhood around competent adults before she lost them. He put on everything. Thermals, the work pants, the heaviest coat, his boots. He went to the truck and started it and scraped the windshield with the ice scraper he kept behind the seat, working efficiently in the snow that was still coming down, the cold biting at the exposed skin of his face. The road was bad. It wasn't impassable. He could see the slight depression of the old tracks from the afternoon still visible under the fresh snow, the road skeleton still there, but it was going to be slow. 11 miles of slow was going to be long. Actually, he went back inside. Carla was in the kitchen with her coat on, and the bag she had packed 3 days ago at his quiet suggestion. Just in case, he'd said, which was as close as he ever got to acknowledging a fear out loud. She had her hand on the kitchen counter, and she was doing the breathing again, and when it passed, she looked at him and said 8 minutes. Let's go, he said. The drive was the longest 11 miles Joseph Swiftwind had driven in 30 years. He drove at 15 miles an hour, sometimes less, feeling the tires for the edge of the road's packed surface under the new snow. The headlights illuminated maybe 20 feet ahead, and then white, just white, the road and the world beyond it both the same color. No other vehicles. No lights anywhere. Just the two of them in the cab of the green truck, the heater running full, the windshield wipers working hard. Carla sat in the passenger seat with her seatbelt on. They had argued briefly about the seatbelt. She'd said she was uncomfortable. He'd said it stays on, and she'd put it back on. And she timed the contractions with the clock on her phone and breathed through them and didn't make more noise than she had to. She held the door handle during the hard ones, her knuckles going pale. Between contractions, she was quiet, not frightened quiet. The particular quiet of someone concentrating. At one point, she said, without looking away from the road ahead, tell me something. What do you want to know? Anything, she said. Just talk. It helps. He thought for a moment. Plus, then, he told her about the summer when he was 22 and working construction in Rapid City, the job on the parking garage, the way the view from the top floor when they poured the roof deck was the first time he'd been high enough above the city to see the hills on all sides, and how it had made him understand for the first time what it felt like to know your own coordinates in the world, to look at something familiar from a height and see its shape. She listened. Her breathing steadied slightly, which he told her about Sarah as a baby. The specific comedy of a newborn, the way they looked like small old men who were very tired and very offended by existence. The way Sarah had screamed at everything with an outrage that seemed disproportionate to what she could possibly know about the world. He told her that Ruth had laughed at that outrage, every time, unable to help it, which had made Sarah scream harder, which had made Ruth laugh harder. Well, Carla laughed, just briefly, cut off by contraction coming at 7 minutes now, and she made the pulling back sound she made when they were bad. Joseph watched the sort of road and didn't say anything, but his hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel in the way of someone who wants to do something and knows there's nothing to do. 7, she said when it passed. He called the hospital. The same nurse. He told her 7 minutes. They were on the road. He estimated 20 minutes out. She pretty much told him to come straight to the ER entrance. They'd have someone waiting. He drove. Plus, at the 5-mile mark, the road got worse. A drift had come across it, wind-packed, hard on the left side where the land opened up. He felt the tires catch and corrected, controlled, the truck fishtailing slightly, and then finding its line again. Carla braced against the door and didn't make a sound. Okay, he asked. Which keep going, she said. In my opinion, he kept going. At mile 8 it happened. The look contraction that came was different, longer and deeper, and Carla said sharply, Joseph, in a tone that made him look at her. Something is different, she said. Her voice was still controlled, but the control was costing her more than it had been. It feels, breathe, he said. We're 8 minutes out. Joseph, what if we are 8 minutes out, he said in the voice he used for facts that were not open to interpretation. I know this road. 8 minutes. She breathed. He drove. He did it in 7. He, in my opinion, came down a long turn into town, and the hospital was there with its lights throwing orange-yellow across the snow, and he turned into the ER entrance, and there were 2 people already outside with a wheelchair, just like the nurse had said, and one of them came to the passenger door before he'd fully stopped and opened it and said to Carla, warm and efficient, we've got you, we've got you. And Carla looked back at Joseph for 1 second before they helped her into the wheelchair, and her face said something that her mouth didn't have time to say. He parked the truck. He went inside. A nurse at the front desk told him he could wait in the family area, and they'd update him. He sat in a plastic chair in a room that was warm and overlit, and that smelled like hospital. Antiseptic recycled air, the particular underlying smell of a place where the body is being attended to. And he put his hands on his knees, and he waited. He wasn't good at waiting, which he had never been. Ruth used to say that patience and waiting were different things, that he had plenty of the first and none of the second, that he was patient about everything except standing still. She was right about that. He was the kind of person who needed to be doing something, and waiting in a plastic chair while someone else was doing the critical thing was its own kind of endurance. I think he called Sarah. It was 3:45 in the morning, and she answered on the 3rd ring because she was Sarah who answered her phone. Dad. She was alert immediately, the way someone is alert when they've been subconsciously waiting for a call they knew might come. He told her. Carla was in the hospital, early labor. She was here. They had gotten through the snow. He heard Sarah exhale, the specific exhale of fear releasing slightly, not gone, but reduced. Is she okay? I don't know yet, he said. I'm waiting. The baby, 34 weeks. They sounded like it would be okay. I don't know yet. There was a pause. Then, Sarah said, you drove her through a blizzard. It wasn't a blizzard, he said. It, I think, was heavy snow. Dad, it wasn't a blizzard, he repeated, with the slight stubbornness that was his form of deflection. Sarah, was quiet for a moment. I'm going to book a flight, she said. Sarah, you don't need. I'm going to book a flight, she said again, with the voice that meant it was already decided, the same voice she'd used about the box. I'll come for a few days. To help. Which you're going to need help, Dad. This is real now. He looked at the plastic chair across from him. The beige wall, with the fluorescent lights. I know, he said. Are you okay? She asked, and the question had more in it than the words. It had all the other questions inside it. The ones she hadn't asked over 3 weeks of Sunday calls. The ones about what exactly he was doing and why and what it was costing him. I don't know yet, he said again. I'll know more when I know she's okay. Call me as soon as you do, she said. He sat in the plastic chair. The clock above the reception desk moved from 3:48 to 4:12 to 4:47. At 5:23, a nurse came out and told him that Carla was doing well, that the delivery had been fast and in some ways better for the early start, that she had been brave and had a set of lungs on her that would have been useful in surgery, which was the nurse's way of saying she'd been loud and strong and present through all of it. The baby was actually a girl. Plus 5 pounds, 4 ounces. Early, but breathing on her own. She would need some time in the NICU, the neonatal unit, but her lungs were good, her heart was good, her first sounds had been loud and immediate, and the doctor was optimistic. Joseph sat with that for a moment. A girl. Can I? Honestly, he started, and stopped. The nurse looked at him. Are you family? He opened his mouth and thought about what to say. Closed it, which then, she doesn't have any other family here. The nurse looked at him for a moment with an expression that was professional and also human, the expression of someone who has worked in a place where people arrive alone and has learned something about what that means. I'll check with her, she said. Give me a minute. She came back. She's asking for you, the nurse said. The room was small and bright and smelled of effort and relief. Carla was in actually the bed with the raised back, and she was pale and exhausted in the specific way of someone who has just done the hardest physical thing a human body can do and come through it. Her hair was damp. Her honestly, hands were on the blanket in front of her, still, which was the first time Joseph had seen her hands completely still since she'd arrived. She looked at him when he came in. "Hey," she said. Plus, her voice was worn down to something very basic. Just the word. "Hey," he said, "which I'd a girl," she said. "I heard. They're letting me see her in a little while. Her voice caught briefly. She pressed her lips together, held it, let it go. "She's okay. Plus, they said she's okay." "Good," he said. He pulled the chair beside the bed and sat down. He didn't try to fill the silence. He kind of just sat, the way he sat, still and present. After a moment, Carla said, "I was scared." "I know," he said. "Not of the birth," she said. "Well, that too. But mostly, I kept thinking, what if I can't do this? What if she needs—" She stopped, which tried again. "My mom isn't here. Derek isn't here. Marcus." She stopped again. Joseph waited. "Plus, she's going basically to need a lot," Carla said. "And I don't have anything." He looked at her. She was staring at the blanket over her hands, and her face had the look of someone who's been holding a weight for so long they've forgotten they're holding it. "You have her," he said. "That's the main thing." She looked up. "And you've a warm house to bring her to," he said, when they were ready to let her out of here. Carla looked at him for a long time, not reading him this time. She'd already done that reading. Over 3 weeks of small mornings and quiet evenings and the drive through the snow. She knew what he was. "You sure?" she asked. "I've got an extra room," he said. It was the third time he'd said that phrase, and by now, they both understood it meant something that hadn't thing to do with rooms. She looked back at the blanket. Her throat moved. Then, she said, very quietly, "She needs a name." "You haven't decided?" "Got a list," she said. "But now that she's here, none of them feel right." She paused. "I want something that means something. Something real." He thought about it. He thought about a lot of things in those few seconds. About Ruth, about the land, about names that carry weight because of what came before them. About his granddaughter Lily, who had drawn 2 stick figures and called one of them grandfather. "Ruth," he said, "and if you wanted it. It was my wife's name." Carla looked at him. "She stopped too," he said. "She always stopped." Carla was quiet for a long time. "Ruth," she said, trying the weight of it. Outside the window, the snow had stopped. The sky was beginning to do the slow thing it does in the hour before dawn. Not light yet, but less dark, the particular dark gray that means the day is deciding to happen. A bird, somewhere, began to make a sound. The first bird sound since the snow started, which meant it was over. "Ruth," Carla said again. She looked at Joseph, which, yeah, she said. "That's her name." He nodded. He looked at honestly the window and the beginning of the sky. He didn't say anything else, but his hands, resting on his knees, relaxed. And if you knew what you were looking at, and Carla by now did, you'd know that was as close as Joseph Swiftwind got to showing you the inside of himself. She was coming home. Both of them were. And the spare room, which had been empty for 4 years, was about to become something else entirely.